All right, thank you for listening to this podcast. This episode of Literally is sponsored by Lexicon and Line. Case, tell us a little something about Lexicon and Line.
Lexicon and Line, it does three things. They are communications consultants. They teach professional business writing and speaking courses, and they are research and data evaluation experts.
And you can find everything about Lexicon and Line at lexicononline.com. Please give them a visit, and thank you so much for sponsoring this podcast, Lexicon and Line.
This is Case Johnston. This is Literally Podcast. We are rolling back again. We're in Ogden, Utah, and I can never remember what do you call this? Studio A?
Banyan 1.
Banyan 1. We're in Banyan 1 today, talking to Dr. Sian Griffiths about her new books.
Is that a new? Is Doctor new?
No, it's always been Doctor. She just never made us. She's never made us say it. Well, I do it just to bother her. But today we're talking about two of her new books, which, let's start with the bio. See, I'm not as practiced as I used to be. Sian Griffiths lives in Ogden, Utah, where she teaches creative writing at Weber State University. Her work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Prairie Schooner, Cincinnati Review, and Booth, among other publications. She is the author of the novels Borrowed Horses and Scrapple, and the short fiction chapbook The Heart Keeps Faulty Time. Currently, she reads as part of the editorial teams at Barrel House and American Short Fiction. For more information, you can visit her at sbgriffiths.com. So today we're going to talk about the new books. Both of them are coming. Well, Scrapple's out, right? Scrapple's officially out. It's between covers and available to buy. Is the short fiction chapbook also out already?
Yeah, it actually came out, I think, late March. And so I managed to release both of these during quarantine at like the worst possible time to try and be promoting books.
Right. And I've heard that from so many people, especially a lot of people who this year would have been their kind of, their AWP birthday when the book comes out, because you always want to go to AWP and you want to go on the year where your book's coming out, and because it's always more exciting.
I was there.
Oh yeah, that's right, you were there. And it was different.
It was the weirdest.
It wasn't so weird. It was so weird. And I, thinking back, I was thinking before I decided, I just decided to go. I didn't, I would always taken COVID seriously, but I thought the odds were so low. And now looking back, I'm thinking I probably should not have gone, but we knew so little at the time. And so many people just, bailed. But our panel was huge. I mean, we were full, because there were so few panels left. But it's been so weird. So how has it been releasing two books that I know you personally have been working on, and I know Scrapple, that you've been in the works with Scrapple for years. To come to release a book during this time. What's the difference between, maybe for instance, with Borrowed Horses versus releasing now?
Yeah, well, and I have to say, I describe myself as my own worst publicist. I am always in charge of doing my own, book tours and stuff, as most writers are. And I know writers who are really good at getting around the country and really getting things scheduled. With Borrowed Horses, I pretty much just contacted any local university or library and said, would you like to have me out? And I was really fortunate in that a lot of them took me up on that. And so that was sort of my plan for these books as well. And at the time I thought, this is going to work out great. I'll be able to tour two books at once, basically read a little of each at different events and call it good. And hopefully that'll work out. And instead, I've been doing a few Zoom readings here and there, and those are fun. They're very different, though. I mean, I'm sure it's you're reading to a computer rather to an audience, and so it's like the world's deadest room. There's no reaction at all, and so you're like, I hope people are liking what I'm reading, but I've got no visual cues. I can't see somebody smile, or I can't hear them laugh, and um, I'm really missing that right now.
Yeah, that's hard. I did a webinar for Crave Nonfiction about teaching one, and we had like 90 people on there, and I couldn't see anybody. So it was just me reading to
Mm.
my PowerPoint, and that was really,
Oh
really
wow,
a
yeah.
difficult thing to be kind of.
It's what Case does on Sundays.
That's what I do on Sunday. But reading to my PowerPoint, and I couldn't see anybody, and that was one of the most difficult things that I've done. And I found myself speeding up, and I found myself just kind of feeling just like really awkward about everything I say. So I can imagine,
Yeah.
like, with readings, when you really are there to just share your work, to not be able to see people kind of nod or smile or laugh or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a different situation,
Yeah.
and each one is a little different too. I mean, sometimes I've had some readings where the person managing the reading will make sure that everybody else's videos are off, and so you're really just looking at yourself,
Hmm.
um, which in some ways is also distracting, but in some ways is really nice, because when the videos are on, that can also
Oh,
be
sure.
like, then you see everything that's going on in somebody's kitchen, say,
Right.
and you're like, do I really want to keep reading my book, or do I want to like
Yeah.
watch this fascinating television show that's now unfolding live action in front
Yeah,
of me?
I think that would be weird. They've probably got kids back there, and you're like, I'm coming up on a part that's maybe a little more adult. Should I kind of edit this because there's a
That's
child in
right.
the room? Um,
Yeah.
but it's got to be strange, and I feel bad for us because just so many friends are having book years and books. And so a little bit of background. Shane was actually our first guest on literally 3.5 years ago. Brandon, when did we start?
That sounds about right.
3.5 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And so Shane was our first guest, and she's actually she's hosted co-hosted quite a few of shows with us. So we're very, as you can tell from the conversation, compared to talking with other authors, we're very comfortable with each other. But so, and I've heard about the book Scrapple for a while. I mean, we talked about where it was within the writing process, and where it was within the submission process. And so when she sent me both 2 weeks ago, I decided to jump into the novel, because it's been, I'd heard a summary of it, and I'd heard the different challenges of shaping and revision, because I know you've had some revision. I hope you'll talk about that
Oh yeah.
with Scrabble, and maybe its life, its publishing life so far. And so I jumped into the book Scrapple, which is from what was the publisher again? I have it on my phone,
It's
but
That's all right. It's Braddock Avenue Books.
Braddock Avenue Books. And
Yeah.
and so I jumped into that. It's a story. It's really about friendship in my mind. It's a story about friendship. It's a story about a brotherhood, about family. It's a story about a family that kind of just has gone through some rough things, and they found themselves clinging to each other, and then friends, of course. And if you get a chance, you should pick it up. And I think probably Braddock Books is a good place to buy it from the website directly, and then.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Mhm.
I know Jeff, the publisher, would be thrilled if
Yeah.
people bought it directly from Braddock
Yeah.
Avenue Books website. If for those who are like, oh, that's a step too far, I get that too.
Yeah.
All my books are also on Amazon,
Right.
so they're easily found.
Yeah, but if you get a chance, order it from the publisher.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they've got beautiful books there, so we'll go and buy other books as well. Because right now publishers could use it. Um, so tell us the life of Scrabble. I mean, if you want to share that, and where it came from, where the idea came from, and then um, more about kind of where it is now.
Yeah. So Scrapple's got a long, long history. I mean, when I wrote the first scene of Scrapple around the time that I wrote the first scene of Borrowed Horses, and
Hmm.
then I had to decide, okay, which book is getting my attention right
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
And so Borrowed Horses won that that battle, I think just because I had more of a sense of what the overall story was going to look like. And so that one had a little bit more momentum going into the project. But yeah, I had this idea for the opening scene where Robert walks into his brother's apartment and finds his brother's a few years older than him, and he finds that his brother has abandoned his own twin babies in his apartment, and they don't know where the brother Sean is. And so, like at first, I thought, well, he's newly moved to this town. He's got to figure out, sort of how to survive without his brother. And then I probably wrote 50 pages thinking this was a novel about him finding his place in Philadelphia, and realized that it felt very, very passive, and like Robert wasn't taking enough action. And I realized that this is also a mystery, like where Sean has gone is a mystery, and that Robert needs to try and solve that mystery. And once I got that piece, then it got more shape and more momentum, and I could write from there. So that helped a lot. But yeah, it went through so many, like I spent a long time writing it and revising it, and then decided to shop it to some agents, and it actually got picked up really quick, like the second query letter I wrote by an agent. And then for the next 3 years we were in a cycle of she'd say, oh, I just think it needs a couple more revisions, and I would make the changes she requested and then more, because I would always see more things like, oh, I can tinker with this, tinker with that, and then I'd send it back to her and I'd feel pretty good. And then a couple weeks later I would hear, yeah, I love this book so much, it's so great, I just think it needs a few more revisions. And after 3 years, I got one day just a really, the email we all dread, where the agent said, I'm not sure if I'm the right agent for this book. Do you have another book that we could look at instead? And I was thinking, what are you talking about? I've been spending like all my time and energy trying to make this book better instead of writing something else.
Why does that happen from agents, though?
I don't know. I don't know if she was just in a different place. I don't know if the publishing world was in a different place. I'm not sure what happened, or like what changed, or if she just didn't think she could sell it, which is, I mean, really for an agent, it's less about do they like the book and more about do they think they can sell the book. But whatever it turns out to have been the case, I think where I lucked out was that every time I sent it back to her and she was reading it, I would be tinkering on little short stories and short fiction and things like that, and writing those. And so right around the time that that I started sending Scrapple out on my own, just to directly to independent publishers, I realized I've got enough short fiction for a chapbook, a short book of a short story collection. And so I started sending that to presses as well, which is why it ends up making me look super productive when really it was just like a lot of failure. And then just writing to pass the time during during those down moments. So it worked out well, but it didn't feel like it for a while there, as you know.
Yeah, no, I understand. And the crazy part is it sounds like you did get a lot out of those downtimes, though, like with all the flash fiction and essays and other things, because I know that you've been publishing essays and short fiction, and so I mean,
I'm currently shopping a collection of essays right now, so we'll see what happens there.
Right, that's well, fingers crossed. I mean, and hopefully it'll come out. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine for COVID, and then your essays will come out after that vaccine. So you're able to really do those things with it that you want to do now. Do you think like maybe when this is done that you will try to do kind of some of those events, even though the books were published in March and April and May of this year?
Yeah, it's tough to say, and I don't really know. I'm like I said, I've never been really great at going out and like hustling up a whole bunch of readings in the first place. And honestly, like my first novel, Borrowed Horses, ended up selling a lot better than it should have, considering like I think it was reviewed in one place ever. And then and I did, like the local Utah universities readings, but for some reason people bought the book and they were on, and that put it in the algorithm, and more people got it because it was suggesting it to other people. And I mean, it's still a small press book. It's not like
Yeah.
gangbuster seller or anything like that, but it found its audience. And so I'm kind of hoping that even though there's a limited amount of support work I can do now with the lockdown, that hopefully Scrapple still finds its audience,
Yeah.
and that people like the book and they, say, hey, friend, or hey, other
Right.
person, like, you need to read this book as well. And who knows? Hopefully it connects with people.
Yeah. So did you bring anything to read for us today?
I could read something.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Whatever you want.
Yeah. Did you have any that you wanted to hear in particular, or?
I think maybe when they find the babies, or
Okay.
even the scene. There's the scene too, with. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a
Uh-huh.
scene with a young woman who lives next door to Sean and Angela,
Mm,
which
yeah.
might be a little intriguing too. It's up to you though.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a
What-
good call. I'm not sure if I can find it off the top. I know I can definitely do the finding the babies scene.
Okay.
Because I've got that one marked. I have to go back and find the other one.
No, it's sure.
But okay, so just a little setup here. Robert is from a small town in Oregon called Herman. It's a totally fictional town. If you try to find it, you won't.
It sounds like it would be in Oregon, though.
It does sound
Yeah.
like Oregon.
Well, I was thinking very much of sisters in Oregon, but
Mhm.
this is a book about brothers and brotherhood. So I thought,
Yeah.
Hermano and Hermano and Herman, and
Yeah.
that's why it's Herman.
Oh, I see.
Anyways, yeah.
And Sisters is a
So
great town.
it's yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it is a
So
good town.
this is the little like subtle nod to a brother version of sisters. Anyways, so it's this little town in Oregon. He's moved to Philadelphia, and they have decided that they're going to go to the brother's apartment for the first time to celebrate the kickoff at the school that he used to play football for before he got his girlfriend pregnant and had to drop out. And so let's see. This is Robert and his mother and his little sister Bridget. Their mother knocked a third time, but the crying only sharpened. The apartment wasn't supposed to be that big. A converted hotel suite, Sean had said. Just a living room, bedroom, and galley kitchen. This was his third apartment in a year and the smallest yet, but, Sean said, it had a view of the Schuylkill through the gaps in the buildings. What's taking so long? Bridget asked. She was 5 and impatient, and they ignored her. Their mother handed Robert the housewarming fern, chosen because it reminded them of Oregon, all green and optimistic. Her face settled into a hard, stubborn worry. The tension built up in her. It pulsed from her skin in waves. She put the spare key in the lock, her mouth pressed in a line. She laid a hand on the knob. Later, Robert would know that his world folded flat in that instant, though the moment was over before he was aware of it. He hardly saw a thing as his mother slipped inside, but he did see something. What exactly? Already he was trying to reconstruct the fragment of color and motion he'd glimpsed before his mother's hand caught him in the chest and pushed him back, before she said, "Wait here with Bridget," before she closed the door. None of the things that should have been in the living room were there. No smell of popcorn hanging in the air, no ice-cold Cokes dripping on the table, no Sean smiling to welcome them. No couch, no coffee table, no big screen TV. The room was empty, except for a large, rectangular crib. The crib wasn't right. It had a flowered bedsheet pulled over it, the corners tied down so it looked like an oversized bird cage. And a little hand. Had he seen that at the sheet's edge? A small fist squeezing between the rails? Loud crying echoed in his ears as if opening the door had increased the volume in the hallway even after the door had closed. He could feel the palm of his mother's hand on his chest where she'd pushed him. "It smells out here," Bridget said. She hadn't realized she hadn't seen, he realized. She hadn't seen, and he couldn't tell her. Robert stopped her as she reached for the door. "Mom said to wait." "I don't want to wait." We're going to. Bridget crossed her arms and stomped her pink shoe, but Robert didn't care so long as she was quiet. He strained his ears listening. You want something to do? He said. You can hold the fern. I'm not holding that dumb thing. Through the crying, Robert heard movement. Just one person. Maybe Sean had gone to look for them, but the game should have started by now. Hassler had a strong coach and a talented running back. Anything might happen, even against Notre Dame. More minutes, more waiting. Finally, open up for me, Robert, their mother said, tapping the other side of the door with her foot. She had a baby in each arm and Sean's old duffel over her shoulder. Where's Sean? Bridget asked. And Angela, Robert didn't say. Press the down button, Bridget. But press it.
Yeah, so and that's this really, this sets this whole story off. In the sense that the family is the mom and the brother and the little sister are all expecting one thing, and then the carpet gets pulled out from underneath them, and they've got two little babies to take care of for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
And so you've said that. So you said that this was written like forever ago when you were starting
Yeah.
when you were starting Borrowed Horses as well. Has this one
Yeah.
has that opening scene stayed true? Did it make it through the revisions, or is it was there something?
The heart of it has the character changed a lot. I think when I first started drafting this book, the main character was the character that's now Jerome.
Okay.
And so he was the one that was finding this, and then I decided that wasn't really going to work. For a lot of complicated reasons, but mostly I was just the wrong person to write his character as a point of view character. And so Robert sort of was born out of that. But yeah, the big change was like once I had Robert figuring out like what was the sort of propulsive force of the book, what did it need to keep going from there.
Yeah, so that did change. Yeah, and Jerome's a great character, and
thank you.
And he's probably my favorite character in the book.
He's my favorite too.
He's brave and he's strong and he goes through a lot of stuff, and I understand why as a writer we maybe pulled back writing him as the protagonist.
I feel like I should explain that a little bit for readers who haven't. And I'll just say outright, Jerome is African American. When I started this novel, I was a younger writer. I was a more ambitious writer in some ways, but maybe one that was not as aware of my own personal limitations. And it was a different political climate as well.
And things have changed even within the literary world when it comes to appropriation and all of that.
Yeah, so, exactly. That really and I think my awareness of that. My awareness, like really early on. This was probably also part of the reason that I went with Borrowed Horses first instead of Scrapple was realizing like there is appropriation if you're writing across racial lines. And it's probably enough to write across gender lines and not to try to take on both of those things. So that all became part of it.
Yeah, and that landscape has changed in the last 10 years. There wasn't this it wasn't the discussion wasn't as big or as controversial 10 years ago.
Or 15 years ago, which is 15
years ago, right? And so and that's quite a bit different. And it's hard. That's hard to navigate as writers because especially when you fall in love with a character you're writing like Jerome, it's hard to say that to yourself. Like, I don't know if I'm the person to write this, at least within where the literary political world is right now. Maybe 10 years from now, because it's hard. I think that a lot of it comes down to, and that's where the discussion lies too, is, especially if you've looked at the American Dirt situation, and that's a big one in the sense that the writer appropriated but she, and I haven't read it. I haven't read
Neither
it.
have I. I've read the controversy extensively.
But she appropriated all the stereotypes and
Mm,
didn't give respect to her characters on a real, actual human level. And that's from what I understand.
yeah,
Where not that she wrote it, and that she used um, um, immigrants at the border as her characters, but the way in which she did it, that was just stereotypical, that was just kind of
right.
almost like torture bait, or it was like that kind of
Yeah,
idea of using stereotypes to sell books. Because I
exactly.
think what people have done, I think people have used written people of different ethnicities or race, and they've done it well, and they haven't caught the
Yeah,
flack because they've done
right.
it in a way that is appropriate to
Without appropriating. Yeah,
without appropriating,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I think that's the, but we're still kind of on one side of that pendulum right now, and I think
yeah,
I think it'll swing a little bit more the other way, but we've got to
yeah,
get through that too.
yeah. And when I look back, like my initial impulse, I think it came from, I think, a good instinct to go like, there are not enough characters of color
Mm-hmm.
represented in our books.
Mm-hmm.
But then, having to sort of do that sort of self-discovery of like, yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm the person to fill
Yeah,
that
yeah,
gap.
and
And it's funny because I've even had this conversation with students, because I'll have students from time to time ask me, well, why can't we write a character of color? And I'm going to say, listen, like, these are your books, like,
mm-hmm.
you have to make these decisions. I can only tell you why I made the decision
Right,
not to.
and where,
And
yeah, where the
it had
argument
to
is
look
right now, yeah, you know,
right. It had, and for me, it had a lot to do with power.
mm-hmm.
Like, I think, if you are from a race or a gender that is in more power, it's difficult to write across that line.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I once heard somebody say that they thought if somebody was in a more, like, a disempowered position, they had to pay attention to the people in power and to read them in some way to navigate that space in a way that people who are in power don't have to do quite that level of reading. And so there's just more blind spots
Sure.
if you're going the other way. And so it's like, hey, I have to recognize
Mm-hmm.
that, as a person who was born with white skin in this country, I was born with a hell of a lot of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that privilege, has left me with too is blind spots where, as much as I want to see the world clearly,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not going to be aware of everything I need to, at least if I'm writing from the point of view of that character.
Right.
Now, at the same time, clearly I want to keep my worlds rich. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to leave those characters
Right.
out of the book. But to jump back to the story that I was telling, like, I had a student in class who was asking about this, and an African American student in my class who asked me, who said, but who's going to tell my story?
Mm-hmm.
If the writers who are out there, like, that she sees, which, unfortunately she had, seen mostly white writers growing up, and she said, who's going to tell my story? And I told her, I want you to tell your
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And that's where I landed on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I also get her yearning, and I have an awareness too that the publication industry is not as welcoming to writers of color as it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be
Mm-hmm.
for these gaps to really be filled in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it's true,
Yeah.
and at the same time, we have to do, like you said, like, we can't whitewash all our books either. I mean, we just,
Right. Right.
we need
Yeah.
we need to do our best to infuse real life. I mean, this is Philadelphia. It's not. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a diverse city, and if you're writing
Yeah.
a book about Philadelphia and there's no diversity in your book, that's a problem that's probably worse than
Yeah.
the others. Well, that's how it's
Yeah.
difficult to say, but that's a problem
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
I can see that, and well, he was my favorite character,
Yeah.
because his personality was he was kind, and he was giving,
Yeah.
and he gave the protagonist of Robert friendship from the beginning, which was, I felt like this was his anchor at a point when he needed an anchor,
Mhm.
and that's why
Yeah.
I loved Jerome so much, and you show
Yeah.
the conflict between his even deciding on his sexual preference really well. I thought that was really subtle, and I mean, and I think a lot of writers really, they go after that as this is something that I'm going to make it really dramatic. But you didn't do that. You made it this subtle kind of moment in a scene within the book where he says, "Oh, are you gay?" And he says, "I don't know what I am. I don't know what's going on." And then I think that's so real towards people who are just trying to figure out their identity. And I appreciated that about Jerome, that he was just kind of,
thank you.
He was honest, and he's like, I don't know, and I appreciate that about Robert too, where he was able to just say, well, okay, I'll stick around no matter what. And so, I mean, it's a good book. It's Scrapple, and like I said, buy it from the publisher if you can. Buy it from Amazon. But fill us in on the chapbook before.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So I had been. I feel like I could never stay in one type of writing mode very long. Like a lot of my stuff is sort of what I would call literary realism. It's set in a real world sort of situation. But a lot of my flash fiction is less so. And so, for instance, the story that starts off the collection is about a man who decides to have the nuclear codes implanted in his chest, and the president would have to kill him to get the nuclear codes to start a war. So not exactly the world that we're living in right now, although maybe a commentary on it. Yeah. But I was writing a lot of these little stories, and I thought of them really as just sort of one-off fun pieces. And then one day I was thinking about it, and I was like, that one's kind of sci-fi, and that one's kind of got this sort of like historical fiction bent to it, and that one's kind of superhero story. And I thought, what if I leaned into this and considered these sort of weird takes on just different genre fiction. And so I started looking around, and I realized if I looked at it that way, I actually had a lot of stories that related to each other, even though I hadn't been thinking about them as a book project when I started it. And so I pulled those together, and I wrote a one or two more small ones around the same lines, and started looking for chapbook competitions. And the second one I sent it to, they took it. I mean, it was taken so fast, and I couldn't be happier. Bull City Press is the publisher, and they're phenomenal. They've just done an amazing job with it.
That's gotta feel so good. I mean, it
really
does.
Yeah.
After
it's so nice to have a quick win after you're like slogging.
I know, it's gotta feel so good, and to just show that there are two sides of the publishing industry where you could just catch really quickly, and I guess that's why we continue to submit, right? I mean, so that we could, there's in our brains, in the back of our brains, you think, well, this could take 4 years, but then there is the side that somebody just loves it really quickly, and it catches, and those are wonderful. And it's like each one sort of reminds you of like that at the end of the day, it's like the dude in The Big Lebowski, it's just like your opinion man. Like at the end of the day, it's just like some editor likes it or he doesn't, or she doesn't, and that's fine. Like it just resonated with that one person, and that unfortunately is going to mean it either gets an audience or it doesn't. But still, at the end of the day, if you're happy with the work itself, that's the thing that matters the most, because the other part is so just hard to catch a hold of. Right. And I think we're lucky to be at a point in our careers where we've seen it all, and so we can we can say, it could catch. Like, I didn't publish one thing in 2019. That was my first year ever. And I've had 7 acceptances, and they all started in April. Started sending out in January.
Congratulations.
7 acceptances. They're all coming out this summer, and I'm like, what is going on here? I have no idea.
You're on fire, man.
And it's like, but all of 2019 was like, should I give up writing? I mean, this is really, really awesome. But it shows you like just the journeys of both of these books, where Scrapple, it was a decade-long work. And it gets picked up, and it's at a good home, and it looks great.
Happy.
Yeah, you're happy. And then another one you work on for, in between here and there, and then it gets picked up easily, and it's at a great home. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I think, like we always talk about with this podcast, if you're listening and you're just starting to write, this is a great example of that's why you have to believe in what you're doing
Yeah.
and keep submitting, because you don't know,
Yeah.
it could be number 2 or it could be number 100, and
Yeah.
they both end up at two really nice homes, two nice
Yeah.
publishing
Yeah.
houses. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Who knows?
I've
Yeah.
been doing it long enough to know, all right, let's go to Submittable, you know, and let's go
That's
check
right.
it out. But no, I'm just, well, congratulations, it's great. And I just,
Thank
like
you.
I said,
Thank you.
I've known Scrapple's journey, and so that's why I delved into Scrapple over the last week, and I enjoyed it, and I loved the literary realism of it, just
Oh,
because
thank you.
those are the books that I like those, and then I like Ruth Ware with her like suspenseful mysteries, but those are those are the type of books that I really enjoy, is the real life, the literary things that happen.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, lay it on me.
On process. You know, and you mentioned, writing in a different race is hard, but I think even every character is developed as the assumption of the writer, right? It's like, what is our, I mean, we're developing a character no matter who it is. If I'm from the United States, and so if I was writing a white person from Ireland or Great Britain, like
Right.
I wouldn't even know the cultural background of how to appropriately do that. And so
Right.
at which point as a writer do you do the looking at the background, the historical context, or do you just say, like, I'm going to leave this character out? Like
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
do you feel it's safe to include the character, as long as you do enough character development, or your intention is correct, or
Right.
or on point? You know what I mean? Like, how should writers maybe approach that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, a really tough question. I think if I feel like I don't know who a character is well enough, I can't write that character. And where they're from may play into that, or their ethnic background, or their, all sorts of things might play into that. One of the things that I tell my students that I see as a red flag is if we start talking about a character as a type. So, like, if I hear my students say, "Oh, a woman wouldn't do that, or a man wouldn't do that, or a black person wouldn't do that, or a Hispanic person wouldn't do that," or like whatever it is, I'm like, okay, we're thinking about this person as a type rather than a character, like as a person. And so, like, that tells me that the writer has some work to do, because the question is, it wouldn't a woman do this, it is whether this woman would do this, or not whether, you know an alien would do this, but whether this alien would do, whatever it is, whoever your character is, filling them in enough in terms of their characteristics, personality, what have you. That said, like, I do think the place that we're from plays heavily into how we perceive the world. And so if as a writer, if I don't know enough about that place and the cultural baggage that the character may carry, whether they're in tune with the place where they're from, or reacting against the place where they're from, like, I have to know enough to develop that character, especially if I'm trying to write them as a main character, somebody who's going to have a lot of time in the book. Like, I think the more you get to see that character talk, act, think, especially if you're in their head, like, you really have to know what and why they're thinking the things they're thinking.
Yeah,
Not easy.
Not easy. And then you have to let your reader in on all of that too, so when they do make a decision, and they have to be able to say, well, I've been informed well enough through past scenes or whatever it is that this is why they would do that. And so they're not not pulling the rug underneath of them, going, well, that woman wouldn't do that because of where she's been. Maybe other women would, but that woman wouldn't,
Right. And how much work voice and action together can carry. Like, I was just thinking about the movie I, Tonya. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's about Tonya Harding, and what's her name? Is it Allison Janney who plays her mother?
I think so.
Her mother's character is wild. Like, she does stuff all the time that you're like, oh my God, what kind of mother would do that? And she's the one that might prompt somebody to say, oh, a mother would never treat her child that way. But oh boy, does that mother treat her child that way. And like, so quickly we're like we're so situated almost immediately to who she is
Mm-hmm.
that by the end of the movie it's almost impossible for her to surprise us. Well, she continues to surprise us,
Right.
but we're like, yeah, every single time
Yep.
we're like, oh, that fits.
Yep.
Yeah, of course she would do that, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. I just read a book called If You Tell, which is a true crime novel
Mm,
about this woman from Washington who like tortured people to death, and
mm.
it's she gets out of jail like this year, and so her daughters are like, we need this book written, and it was really
Oh
really
my
well done. But
gosh,
it's the
yeah,
same way. It's like they start the book with she tortures her children, and then by the end of the
yeah.
book you're like, you mean she takes another guy into their home, and they're like, no, we know this lady, she's gonna torture
Oh
him too.
no.
And she
Yeah,
does, she ends, and you're
yeah,
like, yep, she did it, but we knew it from the beginning because this
right.
lady is that insane. But she gets out of jail. It's a great book, it's well done, especially for a nonfiction writer to just tell it in narrative. It was really really well done. But it's the same thing, it's like it's
Yeah,
established
yeah.
early that this person is this crazy, and they will do these things. And I think that's where some writers get into trouble, is they don't establish them as people, but they establish them,
Mhm.
like you said, as a type or as an
Right,
ethnicity or as a
right.
race. And that's how they're established, not as human beings, not as just
Yeah,
any
and it's
human
so hard.
living in the
Yeah.
world, you know.
I think we're so like hardwired almost to categorize
Mm-hmm,
people and to put them into groups. And really, as a writer, you have to, in some ways, work against that and let them be like fully complicated human beings on the
mm-hmm.
page. And that is so hard to pull off.
It
And
is.
I can tell like every time I'm not accomplishing it, like that's the hardest thing. It's like going like, wait a minute, who is this person? Why are they doing this thing that's expected instead of the thing that,
Yeah.
what would this person really do in this situation?
It's also interesting to read something like a future reader to look back and read something and say, oh yeah, but that was in the context of, or the from the perspective of. And so if your
Right.
characters miss it, but then somebody from the future, somewhere else could reads it and says, oh well, this is what this person who grew up here thinks that my character
Mm-hmm.
would do or should do or would
Hmm.
look like. And there is there value in that of because now you get insight into how someone is trying to portray somebody else, and that
Yeah.
becomes interesting as well.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. Like, I mean, I think that's where we get the whole field of literary criticism, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think of like, I love Charlotte Bronte. I love Jane Eyre. But boy, she does not have a whole lot of views. Like some of her views are ones that I am are, like just abhorrent to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's pretty virulently anti-Catholic, and I
Mm-hmm.
was born and raised
Mm-hmm.
Catholic. Like that's a tough pill to swallow. And yet, if we look at like, okay, where is she from? And I'm not going to excuse her for those behaviors, but I'm going to read with that context
Yeah.
in mind
Mm-hmm.
of like we all have our limitations. Even like brilliant writers who write amazing novels have some severe limitations,
Mm-hmm.
and we can look at how they act in the novel and where they pop up. And I think it does help us understand both that time, and then when we see it in our own time cropping up as well, it's like, oh yeah, it's still with us because
Mm-hmm.
this is a part of human nature that we are continually battling against and we haven't
Yeah.
got a handle on yet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And as writers, it's trying to handle it. And
Yeah.
but going back to the book, I mean, um,
Mm.
I thought the characters were handled very fairly and honestly,
Oh,
and
thank you.
that's all you can ask for as a writer, really, is to,
Thank you.
but
Yes.
that I did. I really, and Jerome was my favorite character, and I could see why you loved writing him. Um,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so all right, we're at our turning
Oh.
point. We've been doing really good. We've been wrapping these things up, and I think people have liked them better
Yeah.
because it's like very succinct. And
Mm.
but anything else you want to add about the two books before we sign off today?
Oh, let's see. Nothing's really jumping out at me
Mm-hmm.
to say. Like, I just appreciate everybody. I guess I could tell you, like, if you're interested in reading the first chapter of Scrapple, it is published online. Um, and oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the name of the online journal, the Embark?
Mm.
There's an online journal called Embark, and they do first chapters of works in progress. And so, like, probably a year ago or so, they published the first
Oh,
chapter of
cool,
Scrapple.
cool.
And so it's maybe I don't think that I don't think the first chapter changed a lot since then, but if people are interested in just seeing like, is this a book for me, that might be a place that they could check it out.
Yeah, and I think with Scrapple too, just from my point of view, I think it kind of straddled YA to young adult, YA to adult fiction. So I mean, this is a book that teenagers could read and enjoy, because the protagonist and the main characters are teenagers, and there wasn't anything in it that I thought that a parent would worry about their teenager reading at all.
Yeah,
it's a very
thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I think that was the biggest hurdle this book had to overcome, was that it had a foot in literary fiction and a foot in young adult. And honestly, like, I didn't want to dumb the prose down,
Right.
Which when I talked to like several agents, especially after I left the one agent, they were like, can we, put this in first person present tense? Can we take out the introspection so he's not like actually thinking that much? And I was like, I don't want to do that. And then if we wanted to push it more towards literary fiction, should this not be in Robert's point of view? Should this be in his mother's point of view, or somebody else's? And I was like, well, that's not quite the book either. But what I was hoping was, like, I wanted to write the book that as a teenager I would have enjoyed reading, like something that was, still thoughtful and smart, but about teenagers. And so,
well, that's what I was,
but hopefully adults like it too.
Yeah,
it's not just a teenager.
Yeah, I really liked it, and that's what I told Mary when I finished reading it. I said, well, it really felt like something that a teenager would love, but it was written.
Thank you.
It was written, like it was written from a literary perspective, in the sense that the characters were extremely well developed. The sentences were very literary. I mean, we've got it was it wasn't just how it goes like with some YA books. It's all dialogue, and there's there's nothing in between it. But this book had that lovely scene setting of what usually comes with a literary novel: scene setting, character development, like you said, introspection, doubt from the characters' points of view, where they're struggling on the page, which usually comes with a literary novel. But I really felt like it was a YA book. It would be very comfortable with teenagers, like, because there's nothing there.
Yeah, for the record, I'm totally against dumbing down prose. It's for who it's for.
Yeah, it is.
You know what I mean? It's for. Yeah. I have my daughter; she's 10, and I have her reading P.G. Boathouse because the way he writes is kind of fun and a little whimsical, and it's for who it's for. It is or it isn't for that person.
Yeah.
And I think people make a big mistake if they underestimate the intelligence of teenage readers.
Amen.
I mean, I
do, and I think
can't.
I think teenagers would love this because it's real. There's a lot of.
I hope so. Yeah.
There's a lot of authenticity in what teenagers go through within the book, and it's not dumbed down. It's not. It's I thought it spanned it really well, but I know how you feel. I mean, I've heard that about most of my books. Maybe that's why my novels haven't sold, is that it's the Goldilocks syndrome is what I've heard, that it's like some people love it for this, but some people love it for this, but because it's spanning genres or spanning age groups, and but I'm not going to change them. Find
no, nor should you.
And it actually reading the book made me feel more confident about some other stuff that's going out that way. So
good.
Well, it was great to talk to you again. As everybody can know, we Shane has hosted these with us before, and so we're very comfortable on the mic together, and I love it. So
this isolation has been too long. It's good to see you.
Crazy. And so Scrapple is the novel, and the chapbook is
The Heart Keeps Faulty Time.
The Heart Keeps Faulty Time. So please pick them up. We got a lot of alone time. Order them and get reading. This is Case Johnson. This is Literally Podcast. We were talking with Sian Griffiths today about her 2 new books that came out in 2020, right in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm so sorry about
Congrats,
that. I know.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us again.
Yep.
Okay. Talk soon.